Hello, everybody. This is a capstone presentation for the Bachelor of Applied Science and Sustainable Practices program. Today we have Matias Vasquez, and I'll let him introduce his project.
So first off, thanks everybody for coming out and giving your attention to me today. Like Stefan said, my name is Matias Vasquez. I'm a senior in the BAS program, class of 2022, and this is my capstone presentation. So initially, when I was looking into potential capstone projects, I had four main criteria that I wanted my project to meet. I wanted the project to have an impact on Cascadia, provide positive effects on campus regarding sustainability, and contribute to Cascadia's dedication to sustainability. Secondly, I wanted a project that was tangible. I didn't want to just collect data and write a report. I wanted a project that could be observed and used by students. That interactivity was a very key element to me. Third, I wanted to keep it realistic. I didn't want to undertake a monumental project with 20 different actors and ultra ambitious goals, because realistically, as a full-time student with a full-time job, it just wouldn't be feasible with my schedule. So that simplicity was very key. Lastly, I wanted a project that could be expanded upon by future students. I wanted my project to leave a foundation for other students to expand and evolve their own projects and kind of make it their own with additions. And then ultimately, this led me to the Canvas Sustainability Guide. As you can see, there's a screen capture on the right-hand side of your screen there. It was originally a student work project. The guide identified key areas of sustainability, such as energy, food, waste, etc., and provided tips to be more sustainable within each area. So essentially, my project consisted of expanding the content of the guide through the introduction of anywhere from 2 to 4 subtopics for each of the modules. Jumping into the literary review, you'll see there's 5 sources here, which correspond to the 5 modules finished. Firstly, the EPA's website, particularly the transportation and emissions section, was very instrumental for providing background information on how carbon intensive the transportation sector is. This source compared emissions from transportation, agriculture, energy, and industrial sectors, as well as provided some rules and regulations surrounding the emissions, which all help with the introductory information for the transportation module. Secondly was a report from Environment America, which is an environmental advocacy organization here in the US. The report highlighted the issue of waste in America and identified lack of uniform recycling programs as kind of a main contributor to the massive waste generated that is not recycled or repurposed. And as well as the source also introduced concepts of zero waste and kind of highlighted some examples of zero waste programs across the country, obviously for the waste module. Third, the Point Park University website, specifically the About Us and Sustainability Facts section, help with the at-home module. Point Park is a university that places great emphasis on sustainability and publish resources that explain common obstacles of sustainability in daily life at home, such as common energy wastes and general advice for keeping the home more sustainable. Obviously, that was for the home module. The fourth source here was a data set from Our World in Data, which is a scientific online data publication. This data set was all about the agriculture sector and the emissions associated. And it broke it down by crop. For example, there were charts conveying the significance of carbon costs associated with raising cattle compared to other farmland crops, such as potatoes, and really helped visualize the intensity that modern agricultural processes have with regards to greenhouse gas emissions. And it also kind of communicated the importance of a balanced diet and how it can reduce carbon footprint. And then lastly, the article from National Resource Defense Council highlighted renewable energies and the different types of renewables. The article looked at the pros and cons associated with each type of renewable, as well as highlighted the most common forms of renewable energy, being solar, wind, and geothermal. Moving into the implementation plan of this project, So the first step was obviously kind of familiarizing myself with the initial state of the guide. And then steps 2 and 3 was analyzing and brainstorming additional content, and then the actual process of creating that framework, of creating those subtopics within the module. Steps 4 and 5 was the large chunk of the project. That was the research gathering, and then the compilation and inputting and editing of that information into the guide. And then steps 6, 7, and 8 were all very similar in the sense that they all circulated around editing and gathering feedback. And then obviously steps 9 and 10, the last 2 steps, the final report and the presentation. Admittedly, steps 8 and 9 probably could have been reversed due to the circumstances that led to this delayed presentation. But nonetheless, moving into tasks completed, I essentially broke it down into 4 different sections. First off, we have check-in and advising, topic research, content inputting and editing, and then report and presentation. As you can see, topic research was the most time-consuming element of this project. But overall, there was a pretty balanced workload between the 3 major categories. And it is worth noting that the feedback process is included in that check-in / advising. And then in hindsight, I really would have liked to dedicate more time to that feedback gathering, but we'll kind of touch more upon that during the challenges and lessons learned. So here's a more detailed breakdown of the tasks completed, as well as a kind of visualization of the time expended per task. As you can see, research was the first half of the project's timeline, and then inputting and editing kind of took up a large majority of the second half of the project's timeline. And then obviously after the finalization of the report and presentation, it put the total hours expended on this project to right around 133. So heading into the results achieved, kind of as I reached my completion point with this guide, there are now 5 expanded modules with a total of 15 subtopics. Each subtopic has interactive links to outside resources, additional activities, and local resources and examples of the topics. For example, within the transportation topic, there are links to biking and walking trails, as well as links to information on King County's metro routes. There are also a handful of educational and instructional videos within each subtopic that kind of further to solidify the concepts that are being introduced within the guide. And as you can see on your screen there, each of those 5 screen captures is one of the 5 completed modules. And those little green bars are the subtopics. So moving into the challenges and lessons learned from this project, the 2 main obstacles faced through this course were the departure of key mentors as well as family troubles. So firstly, there was a departure of a key mentor in the initial stages and a source of potential feedback. This was kind of a bit of an obstacle in the initial stages of the project. And then secondly, kind of around that midpoint of the project, there was a complication that led to a death in my family, which kind of effectively halted my academic productivity and made it pretty difficult to prioritize academics at a very crucial time in the project's timeline, as well as the overall quarter as a student. But the lessons learned from that, I think the organization and method planning was kind of the primary lesson learned. I had originally planned to research around 1 topic per week. And then kind of in hindsight, I think it would have been more beneficial to take on an increased workload at the beginning in anticipation of any potential setbacks that would occur. I don't think I quite anticipated the setbacks that I ended up facing. So for me, that was kind of a big lesson learned. And that kind of feeds into the idea of resiliency, anticipating the unanticipatable, I guess. And then obviously time management. I think I did a good job of dividing the tasks and sticking to that timeline. However, like I said, I wish I would have dedicated more time in the beginning and taken on a bigger workload at the beginning rather than kind of sparsing it out without necessarily planning for obstacles. So that brings us to the project's impact on sustainability and resilience. The Canvas Sustainability Guide contributes to resilience and sustainable development in a few key ways, starting with the resilience principles conveyed. First up, we have foster system thinking. There's a great deal of intersectionality between the topics in the guide, which really emphasizes the idea that all of these areas of sustainability are intertwined and don't just exist in a vacuum. For example, energy production impacts the agricultural process, which impacts food production, which then in turn impacts waste. Second, it encourages learning. Obviously, the guide is an educational tool. It introduces sustainable concepts such as zero waste and circular economies, and provides links to additional sources on these concepts to further learning. And then broaden participation. There's a lot of interactive elements of the guide, as well as the tips provided, should they be followed, to contribute to a more sustainable community. So moving into the sustainable development goals that are kind of emphasized throughout the guide. The first two, zero hunger and good health and well-being, kind of go hand in hand here. These two are kind of emphasized within that food module. Within the food module, there's a topic about food resource, as well as the importance of a balanced diet is also emphasized within the module, which kind of goes hand in hand with both zero hunger as well as good health and well-being. Quality education is kind of self-explanatory, since the guide is in and of itself an educational tool that can be expanded upon and built upon, and it's never really quite in a state of completion because you can always add more. And then sustainable cities and communities and responsible consumption and production also kind of go hand in hand throughout the guide. There's various topics that kind of touch on both these elements. For example, for sustainable cities and communities, the transportation module is heavily emphasized. There's low carbon transportation alternatives that are mentioned that kind of add to this idea of a sustainable community, as well as in the at-home module, there's a responsible consumption section where the concept of B corporations are introduced, as well as kind of navigating the capitalist market and supporting companies that support the same ideas and of environmental stewardship and preservation that are crucial to sustainability. So overall, like I said, I think the guide is a very foundational piece right now. I think it can be expanded upon in a lot of key ways. And I'm very excited to see the route that students take to potentially expand and build upon this concept. And with that said, that concludes my presentation, and I would like to open it up to any questions.